Hello, the KDE project provides libraries, especially the KDE Frameworks version 6. And along with these libraries, there is the documentation for the provided API application programming interface or classes, primarily because these KDE libraries are either C++ or QML. This is, for instance, the API documentation for the KDE Framework version 6 named kconfig. This is the start page. This is how the list of exported classes from the libraries look like. This is how the documentation for a object, a class, this one, kconfig, kauthorized, looks like. There's an inheritance tree. Kauthorized inherits from QObject. The type contains two enums. There are static methods, a creator method, in order to generate this documentation, these HTML pages. The technology Doxygen is being used, which is a open source project that extracts documentation strings, which is comments present at the start of C++ symbols, such as constructors, classes, namespaces, enums, etc. methods. Those are extracted along with the structure of the C++ source code, and HTML such as this is being created with the list of files, the list of namespaces, the list of classes, class hierarchy, and documentation for individual classes and methods. Now, the KDE project tries to use another technology for extracting documentation strings from C++ and QML files, the one that is being used by the Qt framework, which is called QDoc. One of the very first steps has been accomplished, which is the KDE Git repository extra-cmake-modules now has support for generating documentation using QDoc. This was merged a couple of minutes ago, and the merge request looks like this. There will be a QDoc-conf file. In the first step, a file.index is being generated, and then based on that index file, the final output is going to be generated, in our case, HTML files. There is a cmake function, ecm_generate_QDoc. There's an extra cmake file, ecm_generate_QDoc, and documentation. This is the vision on the mailing list, where it says that currently Doxygen doesn't support QML source code that well, whereas the Qt technology does support QML perfectly, because QML is a technology from the Qt framework, and it was necessary that the QML exported API is presented in HTML human readable format for the Qt framework. This support requires that the Qt frameworks tools for documentation, QDoc, also looks in .h files for the documentation strings, not only in CPP files. In order for us to be able to use QDoc, in addition to this merge request, add ECM generate QDoc, which has been merged into extra-cmake-modules. There's a patch that's needed for the Qt project, which was also merged in October 22. So I guess that the current 6.9 beta 2 version of Qt framework will contain this patch. So this would be the biggest two patches that were required a few months ago if you wanted to help porting from Doxygen to QDoc the documentation of various KDE Git repositories. Then we can see an example of how the documentation for KDE Git repositories that uses QDoc would look like. Let's look side by side. Let's look at kconfig if this is available. One of the URLs is https://api-staging.kde.org. The other one is just api.kde.org. Let's look at kconfig. Kconfig core classes. Authorized. Functions in this namespace provide the core of the kiosk action restriction system. The KIO and KXML GUI frameworks build on this. Maybe this suggestion is okay and this is not. We can see it inherits from QObject. The fact that we can immediately see the relevant CMake source code, it's a plus. Public types, generic action, enum, and generic restriction. It doesn't say that authorize is static. Static invocable. It says in here, it says static public members. Generic restriction versus using the namespace key authorized. Yeah, the KDE source code uses heavily the Qt framework. people that program for the KDE community are used to reading the Qt frameworks documentation and therefore are used to HTML pages that look like this that were generated using QDoc. So this is bringing a bit of uniformity. You already know how to read the Qt, the documentation of various Qt libraries. And now you have something very similar if you want to read the documentation of KDE libraries. And let's look at the changes necessary in the KDE source code for a random KDE Git repository when you want to switch from Doxygen to QDoc. You cannot support both Doxygen and QDoc at the same time because they're using different syntax for the documentation strings. So this is a branch QDoc port for the KDE framework KIO. Let's look at the history. So this is the KIO master branch, and then on top of it, using rebase is a commit. This one from 5 months ago. Let's look at the changed source code files. ECM generate QDoc. This is a new functionality in extra-cmake-modules. Provided in here, ECM generate QDoc.cmake. And then this is switching from Doxygen syntax to Qt syntax, but as far as I know, Doxygen does support both this and that. So both slash and then 2 asterisks or slash asterisk and then exclamation point. Exclamation point is for QDoc. And this is the classical version from Doxygen and probably from Javadoc before it. This change totally can be automated, but then the important changes are these commands which have a different name and a bit of a different functionality in Doxygen compared to QDoc. So see also as A instead of C. And the most important Doxygen command that needs to be replaced is the @param, and then @param doesn't really exist in QDoc. This \a is documented as QDoc command -a. The next word is a formal parameter name, so it's about parameters, at least. Yeah, but why is it named \a? Okay, so there is probably an equivalent stable between the commands that exist in QDoc versus the commands that exist in Doxygen. And you are going to need to do massive replaces from one type of commands to the others, and then generate the documentation using QDoc, read it, see if there's any regressions, such as parameters that were documented in Doxygen and now are not. Maybe QDoc doesn't read from anywhere from the same places inside of the .h files or the .cpp files where Doxygen read from previously. So a bit of iteration or a number of iterations will be required. But again, unfortunately, it requires that you change wholesale from Doxygen to QDoc. You cannot incrementally support both. So keep supporting Doxygen and add QDoc documentation for just one class. And then call it a day, do a git commit, make sure that the API staging website is showing the new documentation, the one that you have added, QDoc for one class. And then at the next git commit, you document 2 more classes, and etc., using QDoc. At some point in time, you will be finished, but there's no pressure. Many KDE Git repositories, especially the KDE frameworks, have a long-lived Git branch named work/qdoc-port. You can see it for KIO. We just saw the history, so it's rebased a git commit on top of the git master branch. Also kconfig. Many git commits added recently related to porting to QDoc. Kirigami. Let's look a bit at the commits. So special QDoc files, QDoc Inc. Adding additional documentation for QML types. There's a QML property, which is a QDoc command. Includes other QDoc files. QDoc conf. This was probably before the merge request for 5.2 in ECM has been merged. In kconfig, build qch, cmake option, so all of these do not exist anymore and were replaced by the feature from the ECM merge request, which is in here, this thing. src qml cmake lists.txt ECM generate QDoc. And unfortunately, there needs to be a very large amount of manual intervention in each individual docstring block. Just to keep parity between what was previously, which is Doxygen, and the new technology, which is QDoc. Another QDoc file, kconfig qml.qdoc. QDoc has significantly superior support for QML, and that requires that the QML the documentation for QML types will reference the correct QML files and the correct existing documentation for QML files. A QDoc conf file. In QML module org KDE config. QML type. So many QDoc commands related to the QML programming language. And then going back from QML to C++ with the QDoc command native type.